Now in this lesson we're going to talk about improving or pushing the color in a photograph using color temperature. Improving may be kind of a weak word. We want to really push or really energize the color a lot more. Because in a photograph the color's pretty dead, especially in this one here. When you take photographs midday in the summer, everything's green, everything's the same color, and not a lot of value change. And one way to make the value changes separate more is to change the temperature. So when I look in the tree, in this tree kind of in the front, which will be somewhat the focal point, it just looks like dark green. There's really no temperature in it. You can see some lighter green and darker green, but we want to push the idea of shadow areas being cooler and then the halftones and lighter areas being a lot warmer. But not only that, but push the color a lot more. And what comes with that also, when you do that, is inevitably when you first start doing it, you'll do it too much. And the color will be kind of garish. But that's kind of part of the process. You have to see what the extreme looks like before you can back off a little bit and see what works maybe a little bit better. But the whole thing is geared to get away from the photograph, which is, color-wise very dead, and improve it, make it look more like paint that suggests the light. The more we can push that, the better. And better to push it in terms of temperature than just garish color. In other words, I don't want to try and improve the green here on the flat plain grass just by making it a real strong green. That doesn't do anything. I want to put temperature to that. Make it more of a yellow green, yellow orange, red orange green, any kind of warm green that's going to really punch. Same thing with the shadows. Instead of just a dark green, which really doesn't show any temperature. There's no temperature in this shadow back in here. And if we don't change that, we're not going to have any suggestion of light. And even though I would probably zoom in and not have the shadows over here on the far right, the shadows on the road, they're just a gray. And if we don't push them more towards a cooler gray, or at least a cooler gray, but more of a cooler blue, blue-violet, violet, the color just kind of sits there. It doesn't really do anything. I'll probably zoom in to about here, maybe even a little bit more, because there's way too much stuff around here that doesn't matter to the composition at all. It just takes up space, and it also makes what interests me, the tree here, fence posts, houses, or the house, it makes them smaller because I'm trying to squeeze in everything the photograph gives me. So I want to lose a lot of the peripheral information and zoom into what's important. And I also want to think about the temperature also suggests more distance, so I can use cooler colors, in this case, to make these hills back in here, trees back in there to really go back. I can also lift things up a little bit if I need to fill in a bit more of the sky. I could pull this hillside up there a little bit higher just to fill in more of that sky. Unless there's cloud patterns, something interesting in the sky, color-wise, a lot of contrast in the sky, I can zoom in and cut out a lot of the sky. Because a lot of references, they push things back. The sky kind of takes over. It's almost half the composition. That's really not what has drawn you to the photograph. It's something in the landscape itself. So think about cutting down the sky unless, again, it has a shadow pattern that's kind of a secondary center of interest. But changes I'm making here are a lot of cool colors. And we're talking about cool colors and warm as well. Looking at the background, I lifted up the hills a little bit and really cooled things off. I pushed the temperature back there to suggest some distance. Also pushed the temperature in here to really cool those trees down. And not only cool the shadow down because it's not in the sunlight, but make it a cooler color because it's further away. So if I, again, take that off, you can see how dark the shadow is back in the background. Too far away to be that dark. So just a stronger, cooler color pushes it back, creates more shadow. Same thing with the house. I don't know how I got some yellow-green in there, but even the house itself, not a bad color in the photograph. It's more towards a blue, blue-violet color. I pushed it a bit more, aside from that yellow-green. Yeah, and just some stronger violets to increase that color contrast of a warm and cool. Then in the background, again, the grass here stays just kind of a green. It doesn't go a warm or cool green. I mean, it looks sunlit, But if I push it a bit more, it's going to look even more sunlit, more yellow, green, yellows, oranges, and then gradually getting darker as you come forward. Still all in the sunlight, but just some gradual value change, which I see in the photograph. You can see the value change in there. And just pushing everything warmer. Same thing in the shadows in the foreground tree. I wanted two shadows, kind of a lighter dark and a darker dark. Just simplifying it more than what the photograph shows me. And then kind of a half tone and lights up on top. Pushing the color quite a bit. Don't hesitate to really think outside the box color-wise. And there's always the complement there to mute these colors, like the yellow-green here, the orange. I can always add a tiny bit of the complement. And you need to start experimenting with that, pushing the color a lot stronger, and then seeing how to use the complement to knock it down. And you can do that right on the canvas. You don't always have to mix it on the palette. So same thing in the foreground here, just more bluish green, really bluish green here in the shadow to really suggest the shadow and contrast the warm light. And then simplifying the lights too. Just a couple of values of a more yellow green, yellow and orange green to again suggest sunlight. So really push the color way beyond the photograph, because the photograph isn't going to give us much to work with. This is again, fairly dead color. It's noontime. The darks are there, especially in the trees. But the background color, while it is somewhat cool, it's kind of dead. And the shadow color in the evergreen trees, and even the lights in the aspens. These are yellow-green aspens. And color-wise, nothing jumps out. We got these kind of wildflowers here that are a pale yellow. So if I push some things, starting with the background, it's hard to see in the background, but I pushed the hills back in here bluer and more violet, just to make them, again, have a color that pops instead of a kind of a deadish gray color, which is what the photograph picks up, is just gray. A little bit of violet in it, but I want to push those violets and blues. And the same thing with the shadows in the evergreen trees, especially this big one, which would be kind of a focal point. Too many little darks and lights in that tree. Becomes way too busy, and if I get one overall darker value or dark value of a real strong bluish green, not just a black, the darks in these trees just go more towards the black than anything else. They look green because it's surrounded by so much green, but pushing it more towards a real bluish green and filling in a lot of those little lights and just creating a big dark shape and pattern that makes that tree read a little bit better. And even though this is summer and these aspens haven't turned, still get more of a yellow-green in there because you want to pop the picture. The goal isn't to copy the photograph or, see, if I get too yellow in this aspen, it's not really fall. It's, who cares? It needs to pop. The painting needs to work. So in other words, we're painting for painting's sake, not necessarily a portrait of what's there, or to suggest the time of year, although that could be an option too, to suggest the time of year. But I would rather push the color to make it work better than being too much of a slave to what's in the photograph. And popping these wildflowers a bit more. Even the green grass in here is just kind of dead. Now I am increasing the value, so I have to be careful that I don't get the value here on this grass as dark as the lights up here. In other words, these can't be the same value. And I have the grass value a bit lighter. And just popping those wildflowers a little lighter, more yellow yet, to make them jump out. Here they don't jump out, here they do. Using some violets in the shadows. So pushing that temperature between the dark and light, and then just pushing the color, period, in both light and dark, just to be a little bit stronger. Again, remembering that things will get a little garish, but that's where you learn to correct it. You don't want to sneak up on something and try and get it just perfect. If it needs to be a stronger color, make it really strong and see how much you need to back off. Same thing here. This is a backlit scene. This actually has interesting contrast as far as the lighting goes. It's nice lighting. We're looking into the sun, so there's more contrast, especially with the verticals. The vertical shapes, this is a slanted, but the vertical trees, they're all dark with light that kind of follows the form, kind of rim lighting on these trees. I want to push the color there a bit more also. The value's there. I'm just making the distance a little more bluer green that's a little darker coming forward, bit more yellow in it, but really punching the color up more. These darks in here really don't do anything. They're kind of grayish green. They haven't been pushed temperature-wise. So they don't really read as cooler color. So we need to push that a bit more and just making it more of a bluish green. Even if I throw in some blue itself without anything else in it, it's going to increase that temperature change. And as I'm filling in these bigger shapes, you can see it also simplifies a lot more. I'm getting rid of a lot of the little darks and lights. But make these darks really definite. You know, unless it's a cloudy day, you want to really separate that light and dark and then not blend it as much as the photograph shows. Keep it more separate. It's going to work a lot better as far as suggesting light. I've got a couple of paintings here. This is by John Enking. He was a late 19th century kind of an impressionist painter on the East Coast. And you can see he really pushes warm and cool. All the shadows in here are a definite bluish color instead of just a black. Sunlit areas have a lot of strong warm color in them. Now there is some gray. And then he has to break down the gray, warm and cool. The gray actually helps the brighter color work better. Without the gray, it's hard to tell where the brighter color is because everything's real bright. But it's got some gray rocks in here. Even in the shadows, got some gray along with the stronger color. But a real strong separation of warm and cool in there. Create that strong sense of light.